In this portion of the video, we're going to build a full stack Nextjs authentication. In this portion of the video, with the Nextjs 15 project, we're going to build a authentication flow with credentials and Google OAuth using auth.js. Here, what I have is a Nextjs project and a simple form to register a user. So we'll say the username is dad, the email is dad@gmail.com, and we'll type in a password. When I click register, you'll notice that the state of the button changes to show that the user is in the process of being registered. And we get a message that registering, one moment please. Then we'll automatically redirect it to the login window where we'll have the option to log in with Google or the credentials that we just created. So we'll say the email is dad@gmail.com and the password will be typed in. If successful, we're redirected to the dashboard window where we can see the user that we're logged in as. And I didn't change the session to show the session ID, but we can see that as well too. All of this information is being processed in a MongoDB database, and we're using Mongoose to interact with that database. And we're actually going to add additional features to this project that I'm building today. So stay tuned for those videos to come out over the next few days. But today we're just going to build the user authentication with credentials and also Google OAuth. So if this is something you think you may be interested in building, stay tuned. I'm going to walk you through step by step on how we get it done. And hopefully you can use this to add on to a larger project, or you can use this as a base to something else that you want to build just so you can get more experience and practice. So to start out, what I have is a open folder within VS Code. And you can feel free to name it whatever you like. And I have mine stored on my desktop. But we'll open up the terminal. And to start a new Nextjs project, we'll type in the command npx create next app at latest, spaced and dot because we want to install it in the current directory. And for this project, we're going to say yes to TypeScript, yes to ESLint, yes to Tailwind, no to SRC, yes to the app router, and no to the turbo package, and no to the import alias. And we'll give it a few minutes to finish installing. Okay, and before I start the project and add in the additional dependencies, I'm going to go into package.json. And with the latest version of Nextjs, I've been running into some issues with some of the older packages. So we're just going to add in this particular code so that we can use some additional dependencies without any errors. So we'll save this inside of the package.json. And before we start the project up, I think what I want to do is go ahead and set up our connection to MongoDB and install the dependencies for authentication as well. So we'll be using Mongoose to interact with our database. So in the terminal, let's type in the command npm mongoose. Okay. It didn't take long to install it. Now we'll go to mongodb.com. And we'll sign in. I have one additional project I can make add for this video. So we'll get that going in just a moment. Yeah, I only have 3 going right now, so we're gonna add one more. A new project. We'll say next auth 5 next, and then we'll keep the default permissions to create project. It's going to take a few minutes to load up. We'll create cluster. We'll go with the free tier. We'll keep the name as is. We won't add any preloaded data. Be sure that you select the region that is closest to you and then click create deployment. Go ahead and copy this password first, and then I'm going to click on create database user. It's going to take a few minutes to provision the connection string. So I'm just going to click done for right now. Go back to VS Code. And we can minimize the terminal. So in the root directory, go to your .gitignore, and we'll add our .env to this so that we're not including it in the GitHub repo. Close it out. And then in the root directory, we'll add the file .env. I'm just going to paste in the password that I just created. And while we're waiting on that, let's go ahead and add in the connection function that's going to use the connection string that we are currently in the process of getting established. So in the root directory, let's add a folder named lib, and in it a file named db.ts. And we'll start by importing Mongoose. It's going to come from Mongoose. And we'll create a const named connectdb. It will be a asynchronous function. We'll have a try catch block. And before I forget, let's go ahead and export default connectdb. And within the try, what we want to do is await the connection using Mongoose, and we'll use the method.connect. And inside of it, we want to use process.env. And here we'll need to establish the environment variable name that we're going to store within our .env file. So I'm just going to copy this now to make sure that I don't type it incorrectly. Copy this and just paste it in here. And then we'll go back to the DB. This is the connection. And just to make sure that we are connected, I'm going to log to the console connected. Inside of the catch portion, if we get an error, we'll log it to the console. Connection MDB. And let's include the error message. Space there. And we'll also need to go process.exit and set the status to 1. Save and close this file out. And the cluster is now complete. So we'll click connect, and we're going to use the drivers because we're using Node. And here's the connection string. So we'll go ahead and copy it, click done, paste it back in the .env file, and the password, go ahead and replace it. I can delete this, click save. Okay, so we have a connection to MongoDB established. Let's go ahead and add the models for this project next. So in the root directory, we'll add a folder named models, and we'll start with the user model, which will be, we're going to use credentials and OAuth, Google OAuth provider for this project. So we'll name this file user.ts. And we'll start by importing Mongoose. And we'll say const user schema is equal to new mongoose.schema. And what we want to store is a name with a type of string, email type string, password type string, image type of string, and we can store the auth provider ID as well, and I'll talk more about that once we get to it. Store this as a string. I'm not going to worry about the created at time for this project. And then the big piece, we'll need to make sure that we export it so we can use it throughout the project. So we'll go export const user, and we want to go mongoose. First, we want to check and see if there is a model already created. And if there isn't, we'll create it. But if there is, then we want to leverage, if there is one already created, then we'll go ahead and leverage what's there. But if not, then we will create one using name user, and we'll be using the user schema in order to get this done. I think I better add required here just to be safe. I don't want to potentially miss something as we code this out. So required true. Actually, I won't worry about. Sorry, let's see. That's probably a little better for all of us. True. We'll go for this one. We'll say select false. That way, because we don't necessarily need it back. So we hit save. Close this file out. So we have our models. We have our connection function. Now let's go ahead and add in, let's start up our project to make sure it's working properly. So we'll go back to the root directory in the app folder within the page.js. Let's remove this div, we'll delete it, replace it with the new one, just add home page, and then in the global.css, we'll remove the boiler code, HTML, body, and root. This is just to set the height to 100%. Save, close it out. Now back in the terminal, npm run dev. And while we're waiting on it, we'll go ahead and go to localhost 2000. Give it a moment to start up. Okay, and we see that we have home page on the screen, and we are up and running. So with our connection to Mongoose in place, let's go ahead and work on building out the user register window and login page. So within the app folder, let's add a group folder named auth. In the app, we'll also add a folder named website. And let's drag the home page into the website directory so that we have it organized. And I'll remove this image out here. Close this out. I'm going to add a separate layout file because I like to keep this one for the root of the project and a separate layout for the pages within the project. So I'm just going to copy this TypeScript code so I don't have to retype it in. And inside of the website directory, add a file named layout.tsx. I'm going to use the ISCE shortcut snippet to create a function, and within the divs, I'm going to replace layout with curly brackets and the word children. Inside of the function, we'll pass in children. That way we have this layout. Go back to our local host, refresh the screen, nothing's broken. So we have that updated appropriately, and we'll just type header here just to make sure it's working. And you see we have header on the screen, so that is working. Now inside of auth, let's add a route named register. And we'll also add a route named login. Inside of register, we'll add a file named page.tsx. We'll use the snippet again. We'll go register page. Save this. Go back to the root directory and log in. We'll do the same thing. We'll add a file named page.tsx. And we'll name this login page. Save. Excuse me. Let's make sure that this is working. So we'll go back to our local host and with Nextjs file-based routing system, because we didn't add any brackets or curly braces, it should see register and login as two separate routes. So so in the URL, I'm going to add register, and you see it has directed us to the register page. And I'm going to remove register, and I'm going to go to login. You see it went to the login page. So I'm Right, that is working as designed as well. So what I want to do is have a separate layout for register and log in, separate from the root project because it's going to look a little different. So inside of auth, let's add a file named layout.tsx. I'll use the RFC snippet. I think it's still copied. Yep. I'm going to paste in the children that we copied from the prior layout, and I'm going to add children here. And just to make sure that it is distinguishing this route versus the root route, I'm going to add auth right here. Save this file. I'll go back to my local host. It says that it is not a component. Save. Refresh, and then you see it is off above login page. And if I just go to local host 3000, see we don't see that because it is in a separate layout. And the reason this is working is because within the auth directory, we have a separate layout. If I didn't add this, it would still be using the layout that's within the website group directory. So this is our special layout. So let's go ahead and style the layout first. What I want to accomplish with this layout is just having all of the content centered. Actually, let's go to /login. We'll do a login first. I want to have it all centered in the middle of the screen versus what you see now. So what we'll do to center this is within the root layout. We'll need to add some code to the div. So we'll say class name, and I want to set the height to full. We'll go flex, item centered, justify center. And I'm going to add a background color just to make sure that the height is working. Save. And as you can see, we now have a purple background and login page is now centered versus it being to the upper left as it was prior. So we'll go ahead and close that out. Now we'll build the logout component first. That's actually going to be the easier of the two because within logout, I'm also going to include the Google OAuth. So what we'll do is we'll create a form, create a separate login form for register and login. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to add a components directory that is just primarily for the authentication directory, but it can be used throughout the project. So the way we'll do that is within the auth grouping, we'll add a folder named _components. components. This is letting Next know that this should not be included as a group, nor should it be considered a route or a dynamic route. And within components, add a folder named form. And I don't like the way that looks. So I'm gonna go ahead and add another directory within this just so that it doesn't appear the way that it looks right now. I'm going to add I tell you, we won't add a folder. We'll just keep it all as files. Easier, complicated. First form we'll add is login, or file is login form.tsx. We'll add the RFCE snippet form. Save this, and we'll go back to the login page. Remove login page from between the divs, and let's import login form, and it should be coming from /_component/login form. And within the div, we'll just add the login form so we have access to it. Click save. Go back to localhost. We now see login form is centered on the screen. Great, so that is working as designed. So what I want to do is create a reusable wrapper. That way we can have the same layout for the login and register form, and of course you can copy and paste it, but just want to try to make it a little more modular so that we can always make changes to it if need be. So we'll close out the page.tsx for right now, and within the components directory, let's add a file named form wrapper.tsx, and I'm going to use this shortcut to create a quick component, or excuse me, to create a quick export default. And we're going to name this form wrapper. And let's just get something on screen for right now. So we'll say interface. This is going to be reusable. We'll go props. And we know we're going to pass in children. And this is going to be react.reactNode. Passing in a title label. And this will be a string. We'll also need a back button. This is going to allow us to, so let's say that if we have you know how at the bottom you'll see, do you already have an account? Click here, or do you need to create an account? Sometimes users click on the wrong button, whether it be login or register. So I think what I'll do is go ahead and just create a back button, and that way we can kind of control what the user sees, and they can toggle between the login and register in the event they click on the wrong button. So this is going to be a string. We'll say back button href. That will be a string. And then show social. We only want to show the social logins on the login screen, not register. So I'm gonna make this a Boolean because I'm not going to show it on register, but we are going to show it on login. All right, so now that we have the props, let's pass these into our wrapper. And I think I'm going to pass this in, say children, title label, back, show social. And then the interface that we're passing in is the props. Now, we could have named this something a little more unique, but this is fine for right now. And within the div, we'll just go ahead and remove form. The initial div, we're going to set the width, so we'll give it a class name of width as I'm going to set it to 600 pixels. Give it a little bit of shadow, make it small, and we'll set the rounded to medium. And then just to get the wrapper on screen, I'm going to pass in children. Say background color for right now. And then we'll go back to the login form, and we can remove the content or the div for the form. And let's go ahead and import the wrapper that we just created. So we'll say import form wrapper. And inside the return statement, we'll go form wrapper. And we didn't create anything else within, we didn't add any content within the wrapper just yet. So we'll just go form wrapper and we'll say testing. Click save, and we're getting this error because we're not passing any props. But let's see what we got on the local host. I see. Because it is going to be what we pass in dynamic. Well, we're going to have the option to show or not show. Still doesn't like it. Let me see. Now, save. And then you see that we have the testing on screen with the green background. So the form wrapper is working properly. So let's go back and finish coding it out. So we'll remove children. And instead of hard coding the header, I think I'm going to pass it in as a prop. So within the components directory, let's add a file named form header.tsx. And what we want to do is just pass in a reusable title, and we could have hard coded it within the form wrapper, but let's just keep everything modular. So we'll go interface, props, we'll go title, and we'll set the title. Let me set the title label. We'll set this to string. And I think that'll be all that we'll pass in. We'll do const form header. Passing in title. Title. Function. That default form header. Within the return statement, pass in a div, set class name and a width of full, set the direction to flex column, give space on the Y of 1, item centered, justify center, and for the H1, this will be the, actually, we'll set this as the name of our site. So we're just going to call it client tracker. And let's style the H1 a little bit. We'll go class name, text, extra large. And we'll say the font will be semi-bold. And then underneath the H1, we'll pass in the T tag. And this is what we will be able to distinguish based on the page. So the first one we're building out is the login page. So for right now, let's just style it and we'll say text muted, foreign, F-O-R, R-E, and then we'll say text small, hit save, and we'll go back to our form header. And now we want to bring in the form header and use the title label. So we'll say, where you going, baby? Okay. In the div, we'll bring in the form header. I'm just going to use a shortcut. And it is looking for a title label because this is going to be on the login screen and I don't want to set it here. Excuse me, I'm just going to pass in title label. And then we'll close that out. Now I want to care for the children. And this is going to be the actual form. We'll say class name. And we'll just give it a little bit of padding, so padding it 2. Underneath the closing div, we want to say show social. And here we want to have social login. I'll set that up in just a minute. And underneath this will be considered the footer of the wrapper, if you will. Then we'll go div, class name of flex, with the full, justify center, margin top of 4, items to centered, and I want to create a back button component as well. So I'm going to create the back button component first, and then we'll come back and create the social login. Let's see what the screen looks like. Yeah, it's still upset with us because we need to do something with the show social label. Comma will help with that. And you see showing client tracker, and we have testing on the screen. And that is because we have testing right here. So let's go ahead and create the back button component. So within the components directory, let's add a file named back button.tsx. So this is just going to be a reusable component that will allow us to change the message that the user sees in the event they need to go back or they clicked on the wrong authentication method. Excuse me. So we'll start with the snippet. Back button. Say, do want to bring in link. This is going to come from next link. Then inside of the button, we'll need to pass in some props. So we'll say interface prop, href string, and then we'll go label string, href label, pass in props, back button. And what we want is to use the link. We'll say href, and pass in the href that we distinguish, and then the label will just be used within the link so that we can type in whatever we want in the label. So we can close the back button file out, and we'll go back to the form wrapper, And if you type the less than symbol, capital B, and begin to spell out back button, you'll have the IntelliSense to automatically import it. So we know that we'll need to pass the back button a href. And I think for this one, we'll just set the href to back button href that we created here. And then the label, we need to pass in the back button label. And if we close off this component, great. Now we're ready to use the wrapper and make things a little easier for us. We'll just need to create the social login. So let's just go ahead and create that really quick. So inside of the components directory, let's add a file named social login.tsx. And within this, we'll need to have the oauth set up, but we haven't set it up just yet. So for right now, I'm just going to create a component or a function that we can export and we can pass into the wrapper for right now. I think this is all that we need to have within the wrapper. So we'll be able to see it. And once we set up the Google, then we can come back and bring in login, and that will be that'll take care of that. So I'm gonna take the shortcut way to bring in the social login component. And now we're ready we can close out the form wrapper, the social login for right now, and the form header. So let's go back to the login form and begin to bring this information to life, if you will. So we'll go title label and we'll say, hey there, welcome back. And we know we need the back button label. So we'll say if we're on login, if we want the user to go back, that's implying that they don't have a login. So we want to send them back to register. So we'll say, we'll just say something like need an account, question mark, and save. And then we'll go back button href. And then the location for this or the route for this is /register. We'll click save. And in this instance, we do want to show the social because remember the user, if they're on the login screen, then they can just automatically log in with Google without actually registering for an account. So in this instance, we do want to show it. So let's click save and check out what we have on the screen. Sorry about that. So now you see we have I can remove this green and purple. Do that now. Form header. Well, it wasn't header, it was the wrapper. We remove the green background. Save. And on the form, that's in the layout. So we go back to layout.tss and just remove the color. Close that out. This back. So now you see that we have this on screen. And this is the client tracker just saying hello to the user. I want to add form wrapper. Helps if I fix that. Save. It's a little better. It's much better. And then let's give it some padding. There we go. Rounded medium. Let's go large. All right, so we see that we have the social login will be here. And then in place of testing, we're going to have the actual login form. So let's work on that now. So inside of components, we can just hard code it in. We could make this a reusable component as well, but we'll just keep it simple and just hard code it in. So inside of the form wrapper, we'll go form. And this will be a action that we're going to pass in, but we haven't created our actions just yet, so that's okay. So the first input that we want, or what we want within the form first, is a div. We'll give it a class name of flex column, and set the gap to 1. Then we'll have a span email. We'll give this a class name of label text. Okay, let's see that on screen. So underneath it, I'm not going to use any UI libraries, component libraries, I should say. I'm just going to use Tailwind. So we're going to add some styling for the label, or for the input, I should say. So we'll start with an ID. This will represent the name. No, this is the login. So this is going to represent email. And then we'll give it a name of email. Placeholder will be email. And then class name will go with full, outline none, order large, padding of 2, and let's just see what this looks like. Save. That'll work. And then we'll go rounded large, click save. Okay. Email, and then we know we'll also need a password, so we can just copy this div and paste it in. Instead of email, we'll say password, ID of password. Name will also be set to password. Last but not least, placeholder will be password as well. Save. Okay, so we see that looks pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add a button, of course, to click submit, and we'll have a reusable button that we can use for login and register. So within the components directory, let's add a file named submit button, tsx. And this submit button, as I said, is going to be reusable so that we can pass in some information or a label. And if the label is submit, or if it is, if it is login, then we'll show one message. Otherwise, we're going to assume it's registered and we'll show another message. And you can add a switch statement and add as many conditions as you like. But for right now, this will be, we're just going to keep it simple. So we'll start with setting this as use client. And we're going to import form status. I'm sorry, it's use form status. State status. And it's coming from a React DOM. There's a few ways you could do this, but I'm just going to use form status. And I also want to bring in a library called CLSX. And what this is, it's just going to allow me to dynamically pass in some JavaScript based on a condition. So in the terminal, we don't have to close out our current terminal. Let's type in the command npm iclsx and press enter. A few seconds. All right. Close this out. And let's go ahead and import CLSX. There we go. Now let's create an export const. We're going to name it submit button. And for this one, we'll just keep, because it's just one, we'll go with label. And pass in label string. We'll say constant. We want to grab pending from use form status. Pending and set it equal to use form status. And we'll go const. And we could have coded this directly in, but I'm just going to keep it a little more modular. Go const class name. And we're going to pass this to the button. So the initial, what we want to pass in, is the styling for the pending state and how it is in its normal state. So we'll go CLSX. So this is a little easier to read. This is the initial state. So we'll set the text to white, background color to slate 700. On hover, we'll set the background to slate 800. Set the font to medium. Rounded, large. Set the text to small. Width to full. Padding on the X of 5. On the Y of 3. And then we'll make sure that the text is centered in the middle of the button. Now, when we're in the pending state, and this is where CLXS shines, we want the opacity to be, we'll say 50. We'll set the cursor to progress so that we don't have the ability to use our cursor as normal. And then we'll just add pending at the end. That way, it knows that this is how to perform in the pending state. And underneath the, there we go. I'm missing a bracket. It ain't yelling at me. Okay, so underneath the parentheses that closes, that goes with CLSX, the closing parentheses, let's add the return statement. This is going to be a button. And we'll add the label first. So we'll say label if it is equal to, login. And what we want to do is we want to show one condition, and that condition is going to be a span, and this is representing the label. So this is the words that's within the button. We'll go label, span, and then we'll pass in some JavaScript, and we'll say if it is pending, we'll say logging in 1 moment. Or we just want to show login when it's not in the pending state. Then outside of that closing parentheses, if we don't type, if the label doesn't equal login, what we want to show to the user is the exact same thing. So I'll just copy this code because we're going to use this for register as well. So we'll say registering. And then the text we want to show is register. Click save. This looks good. Should take care of it. Close this out. So now we'll head back to the login form, and all we want to do now is underneath the closing div is include the submit button. Well, actually, no. Let's include it within the div. I think if we come outside of the div, it will it'll lose some of the styling. So we'll just use the shortcut to bring in the submit button. We know we need to pass in a label, and this is the login form, so we want to pass in login. Save. And if we go back, you'll see that we have the login button showing now, but it doesn't have any color or anything to it, so I may have missed something or fat fingered something. Sorry about that. Background Slate 700. Yeah. Huh. Let's change this to it's not capturing any other style, so I must have something off with my format. Capacity 50. Oh, it helps if I pass the class name, duh. So sorry about that. Let's go back to the button and we'll go with a type of submit. Actually, I'm gonna change this back to Slate. We created the class name and I see that it's unused. So we just need to pass it to where we want to use that class name, and that's to the button. And we also want to do disabled pending. Now let's hit save. And one moment, one moment. And just hit close. Go back. Now it looks a little better. All right, so now we have this in place. We can go ahead and complete out the register page because that one's going to pretty much be the same, but the only difference is it'll have a name field and it will not have the social field. And we won't say need an account. We'll probably say something like already have an account. So we'll go back to our text editor and we'll go to the root directory register page. Remove that content from the div, and in the components directory, let's add a file named register form.tsx. And this is going to look very similar to what we had for the login form. So you know what? We actually can just copy the login form and just make some corrections or modifications, I should say. So we'll just highlight it, copy it, and we'll just paste it in. And we'll need the form wrapper. We're going to need the submit button. We don't have a action to pass in just yet. So instead of it saying login form, I'm going to change this to register. It says login. Make sure you update the export. Save. Now let's go to /register. And we see it says register page. So let's go ahead and pass in this form inside of the register page. Okay, so it basically, so you see it's pretty much the exact same. We'll just need to add the password field, and instead of login, we'll need register. We'll need to update the title, remove the social login, and instead of needing an account, say something like I already have an account. So let's do that really quickly. Register form. Welcome to the client tracker. And instead of saying need an account, we'll say already have an account. Already have an account. And if you do, we want you to go to /login, and we can remove the show social. And so instead, let's add a column for name. And I think it is name. It's not username, is it? Let's go back to our models. Yes, just name. So we'll say name, and ID will be name. Change the placeholder from email to name for this one. Click save. And you see we have the name, email, password field. Hey there, welcome to the client tracker. Let's change this button from submit to register. And let's test this out. Already have an account. Takes us to login. Need an account. Takes us to register. Perfect. So this is working properly. Now we're ready to set up the functionality to register and log in the user. We'll be using bcrypt for that, oauth as the authentication library, and we'll also set up Google OAuth, and that'll take care of our register functionality. So let's do that now. All right, so we'll go to the documentation to set up auth.js. Of course, we're using Nextjs, so we'll start by typing in the package as requested. Love you too, darling. Be careful. Love you. We'll go to the terminal. We can keep the current terminal running, and we'll just paste in the copied dependency from the documentation. And we need to set up a auth secret. I'm not going to worry about using the package as suggested, but if we were deploying if we were deploying or using this in a production environment, I absolutely would recommend it. So we'll copy the auth secret, close this out for right now, go back to the .env file, and we'll paste in the auth secret and just add any text there as your auth secret. It just needs to be stored within the environment, and it needs to be there in order for everything to work. Then we'll need to add a auth.ts file, and this needs to go in the root of our directory. So I'm just going to copy this boiler code for now. Go back to the root directory, add a file named auth.ts. And for right now, we'll just paste in the code as suggested. Then we'll need to add a route handler under the API directory or the app directory. So I'm going to copy this code listed here. We'll go back to the app folder and just click on the folder listed there, paste in the copied code, add a file named route.ts. We'll copy the handlers and export. And of course, we need the get and post. And close this out. Close this out. We won't need those again. Now we're ready to set up our providers. And for this project, I'm going to be using Google. So the first thing we'll need to do is store a auth ID and secret in our environment variables. So I'm going to copy that. Go back to the .env. And then we'll need to add the Google provider to the auth.ts file. Auth.ts. Inside of providers, just add Google. Save. Okay. And I'm not going to worry about any of this information here. So the last thing we'll need is a ID and secret. Google console. Sorry about that. So go to Google console. Yeah, I think I can set up another project. Could just select from one that we already created, but I'll create a new one. So we'll go to new project and we'll name it. We'll say next five. So create. Okay, it's created. And we'll go to select project. Okay, we're already there. Let's go to dashboard. And API services. Let's do the OAuth consent first. We'll set this to external and create. Set an auth name. I'm just going to call it next auth 5 social. Support email is going to be my email. So feel free to use the one that you should already have within the Google console. Just trying to make sure it copied. And then here we'll need to add a developer contact info. We'll just paste in the same email address. Save and continue. So now we'll need to go to credentials. Actually, make sure I didn't miss anything. Let's go to publish app. I don't think so. All right, so it is published. Depending on when you see this video, this message could be here and the experience could be different. So just kind of keep that in mind. So then we'll go to credentials and we'll go to create credentials and we want to create a OAuth client ID. And the type of application is going to be a web app. And we can keep the name the same. The big thing is the authorized redirect URL. If we come back to the providers, we see that it needs to be whatever our root URL is. In this case, it's going to be localhost 3000, but we need to include the API auth callback / Google. So I'm just going to take the easy way out. I'm going to copy the localhost 3000, add to the authorized redirects, and then we'll go to documentation and then we'll copy this API /auth /callback / Google, paste it in, and we'll click create. That should be all that we need. So on this window, we have the ID and secret. So I'm going to copy the ID, paste it in. And we'll do the same thing for the secret. in, and then we'll click OK. Now that should be all that we need to set up the consent for the Google OAuth provider. So we'll certainly find out in a moment. So let's just go ahead and add that in now, and then we'll come back and do the register, and we'll come back and do the credentials provider after we've done the Google. So within the save.env, within the social login screen, because we have everything already set up, all we really need to do on this window is just style and bring in the auth provider. So we'll go to social login. I want to import sign in. This is lowercase. Yeah, you know what? We can't do this just yet because we're not using an adapter. And I forgot I'm going to have to write a custom callback in order to create the user. So we won't worry about testing it out for right now. We'll go back to the original plan of creating the register and login functionality for the credentials provider. So within the lib directory, let's add a folder named Actions. And inside of Actions, let's add a folder named User. And eventually we're going to add Client as well, but for right now, we're just focused on User. Let's add a file named register user.tsx. So in this window, what we're going to do is just write the functionality to register a user to our database. Normally, this could have been handled by OAuth provider, but in this instance, we're going to do the credentials provider. So at the top of the file, we'll mark the file as userver. Then we'll bring in the user, and that's going to come from @model/users. Then we'll need to bring in redirect. This is going to come from Next Navigation. We'll also add the connect to DB. That's our connection function. And the last thing we'll need is a way to encrypt the passwords, and we're going to use bcrypt to help us with that. So within the terminal, let's type in the command npm ibcrypt-ts and press enter. And once it's finished installing, we can close the terminal back out. Now what we want is to import a package from that library. So we'll go import from bcrypt-ts. And the package we want to use is #sync. It's going to help us with encrypting the password. So let's go ahead and create the const. We'll go const register, register user is equal to async, and we're going to be capturing the form data. This is going to be data. Okay. And before I move forward, let me be sure to export register user so we'll have access to it within our UI. So first thing I want to do is capture the data as a string from the form data that's being submitted. And what's going to be passed in, if you recall, is a name. And we'll say form data, form data. Reason it's doing this, I see this capital, it should be lower. Form data dot get. And what we want to get is the name as a string. I'm just going to copy this. Instead of name, we'll make this email. and this will be password. And then we'll update these strings as well. Email, password, and we'll say if we don't get a name, if we don't get an email, or if we don't get a password, you cannot fly. We'll say throw new error. Please fill out all. Okay. If we do get everything, let's come outside of that if statement and we'll say await connect DB. And we'll go const. First, we want to check to see if the user already exists. If it does, then of course we won't move forward. So we'll say const existing user. It's going to be equal to await. And then we're going to use the user model in order to query the database. And we'll say find one. And we'll look that user up by its email. So if this does exist, and we want to throw an error, user already exists. So if the user doesn't already exist, then we know we need to create one. So first, let's go ahead and create a const hash password, because we don't want to store the password as we get it from the form data. That's going to be unencrypted. And this is where hash sync is going to help. So we'll go await hash sync. And what we want to hash is the password. And we'll go 12 rounds of that. Right. And now we want to use the hash password with the name and email to create a user. So we'll go await user.create. And this is a field from or function from Mongoose. We're going to say name, email, and password. It's going to be equal to hash password. Store it right there. And then to keep it simple, that should take care of it. We'll go console.log, user created, no issues, just to make sure. And then we'll use the redirect to redirect the user to log in. So let's click save. And we'll go back to the register form. And now we want to pass in a action. And the action we want is the register user action or function that we just created. And if all goes well, we have the name. We have the ID and name with name. We have the ID, name with email, ID, name with password. And let's just set this type to password. And let's set this type to email. We'll click save. Not terribly important for email, but certainly important for password. Oops, add a, oh, hold on. Okay, there we go. Save. Now let's test it out. So we need an account. So we're back to the register page. And I'm just going to register a user with say Chase, gmail.com. And we'll add a password. And if all goes well, we should be redirected to the login page. And we should also see while the user is being registered, this button, the opacity should change on it, and the text should change from register to registering. One moment, please. Click register. So we see we have the effect. and it actually redirected us to the home page. I bet because I didn't put login. Yeah, I just did slash versus login. So the main thing is, let me make sure that the user actually saved to the database. So we'll go back to MongoDB. And if we go to clusters, browse collections, we have the test and the user table. And if you look, we have the name, the email, and we have a hash password. So perfect, it created the user. I want to test out this redirect functionality as well. So we'll go back to host, and instead of it going to login, let's go to register, and I'm gonna create a new user. Now it should redirect us to login. Okay, so we have that functionality cared for. So now we'll need to set up the credentials provider and take advantage of what we get from Nextjs and add in some functionality of our own as well. So we can close out register user. We're all good here. We can close out page.tss. Save it. So let's start in the auth.ts file. And we're going to need to add some additional functionality in order to get the ability to use the credentials provider. So at the top, we already have Nextjs. Let's go ahead and import credentials sign in, and this should be coming from Nextjs. We'll also need to bring in the credentials provider, and that's coming from next-off/provider/credentials. We're going to need compare because remember, we're hashing the passwords, and the bcrypt library has the ability to confirm, where it has the ability to decrypt and confirm the passwords that are being entered versus what's stored in the database. And the packages that we're going to use is named compare. We'll also need to bring in the user model because we're going to be querying the database to find the user and compare its information. So we'll go import user. And I think that'll be all that we need in order to get the credentials working. We'll need to add in more, of course, for the Google login, but we don't need to worry about that right now. So the first thing I want to do is let's add credentials provider, the object. Actually, that's not right. It should go in the and we'll go empty object for right now because it didn't yell at us. Move that out the way. And then now we want to bring in credentials. There we go. And we'll start with the name of this object, and it's going to be credentials. And we'll pass in credentials and say email. It's going to be label. Email. Say type to email. And we'll say password. Label, LA, password. Type to password. And underneath the closing bracket, we'll add a comma, and we'll say authorize. Async, we'll be passing in the credentials. T I E no, I'm sorry, CRENDTIALS. Somebody definitely isn't a spelling scholar. Credentials. Here, let's pass this in here. Credentials. Okay, I spelled that correctly. It's not authorized, what it is just authorized. Okay, so we want to go const email is equal to credentials.email, and this should be as a string or it'll be undefined. And then we'll go const password is equal to credentials.password. This will be as a string, passing undefined. And we'll say for a little validation, if we don't get an email or we don't get a password, then we'll throw error. No, I'm sorry. With this, we'll need to throw credentials sign in because that error is going to come from the auth provider. We'll say, please provide both email and password. If we do get that information, we want to say we want to connect to the database at that point. So we'll say await connect DB. That is our connection to MongoDB. And we want to create a variable for the user. So we'll say const user dot find one. Because if the user already exists, then we don't want to create a separate user. And then we'll say find one by email. And with this, we want to select the password to go along with it because we're going to need to verify it. And I'm sorry, this is login, not register. So we want to find the user by the email because there should already be one within the database. So once we establish the user variable, underneath it we'll say if there's no user or there's no user password, then we want to throw a new error and just say invalid email or password. So now that we have this information, a comparison needs to take place. And what we're comparing is the password. So we'll say const is matched is going to be equal to await compare. And this is coming from the bcrypt library. What we're comparing, of course, is the password to the user.password. Okay. Now underneath the is matched const, we'll say if it doesn't match, then we want to return something to the user. We'll say throw new error, password. Actually, we don't want to say it doesn't match because that kind of gives it away. We'll just say, please check the email and password. Okay. And if this does work properly, then what we want to do is we want to return something back to the browser. And congratulations, we want to return that user that is logged in. And the ID is going to be equal to the user._ID. And we're going to set this to string. And we'll say name is going to be equal to user.name. Email, guessing, you guess right. It's going to be email is going to be user.email. So that will take care of creating and confirming that the user is logged in. So now underneath the closing bracket for the providers, let's add in pages. And sorry, the documentation doesn't provide a lot of some guidance, but it doesn't really get into how to write the the credentials from scratch. So I'm not referencing the docs a whole lot on this one. So we'll go pages, sign in, and we'll set that to /login. Yep. So now this should work just fine as is. But the last thing I want to do before we move on is create a callback because we need to establish a session. And this is what's going to allow us to tap into the user and get his or her information while they're logged in, store a session in the database, and maintain it for a period of time so the user doesn't keep getting logged out every time the page refreshes or something happens with the site. So underneath pages, let's add callback. And for the callback, we're going to have a async. This is going to be an asynchronous function. And what we want is the session. We want to grab that session token. We say if token sub init crazy. And it will say if session.user.id is equal to token.sub. Then outside of that if statement, we want to return the session. And we'll hit save. And we're going to come back to this file. Actually, you know what? We'll go ahead and add in the JWT as well. So we'll say outside of the callback, I'm going to make sure that we get this right. Yep. Outside of the callback, add a comma, and then we'll go async JWT token. It's going to pass in a token and a user. And we'll say if user, we want to pass in the token. Pass in the token.id is equal to the user.id. And then we will return token. Okay. Well, we won't worry about that right now because that's going to be once we log in with credentials or once we log in with OAuth Google. So this looks good. Now what we need to do is create the login functionality, and that's going to be stored within our actions directory. So within actions, go to user, and we'll go to login-user.tsx. We'll add a file, And within this file, we want to use the functionality that we just created in order to help us log in with the user. And we're also going to tap into we're also going to use what's provided from the credentials provided with Nextauth. So let's start by marking this file as use server, and then we're going to import sign in. And this is going to come from @auth. Then we want to bring in the credentials sign in, and that's going to come from Nextauth. And last but not least, we want the redirect, and that should be coming from Next Navigation, so that if successful, we can redirect the user to a route. And we'll just write a quick function in order to grab this information. We'll go const login is equal to async form data is what we're passing in. And this is going to be data. And what we're grabbing, let's export this first. So we'll go export login, and let's name this user in. Okay. So first thing we want to do is grab the data from this form data. So we want to grab the email. We set that equal to form data.get, and we'll be getting the email. And of course, that's going to be a string. We'll go const password is equal to form data.get password string. And underneath it, we'll have a try catch block in the event something goes wrong. Ultimately, what we want to do is utilize the sign-in functionality from auth, and what we're leveraging is credentials. Then inside of this object, we'll need to pass in some information. We'll set the redirect to false. I'm going to handle that through this function. And then the callback URL, we want to set it to the base route or the home route. Set email and password. Okay. And then within the catch portion, I always like to log the error to the console. Error. Okay. And then we will, actually, we can't do it this way. That's right. We need to change this to const some error. And this is going to come from credentials error as credentials sign in. And then we'll just go return some error. And what we want is the cause of that error. Then if all goes well outside of that try catch, we want to redirect the user. Let's redirect them to dashboard. We haven't created that route just yet, but we'll do so. And this looks good. Sorry, that should be. This looks good. So now, what I want to do is I need to, because we're creating a custom session, I'll need to let the project know that we're not going to be using the session from auth, but we'll need to set up a separate variable in order to get it. And we'll need to go ahead and set that up first. So inside of lib, let's create a file named get session.ts. And very simple file, we're going to import auth. And this is coming from @/auth. And we're also going to need to bring in cache. This is coming from React. And all we want to do within this file is create an export const of get session and set it equal to cache async. And then we'll say const is equal to session await auth. Call it. Okay. And all we'll need to do from this is just return session. Let's click save. Now we're ready to bring in this login function into our login form. So let's go ahead and close this file out. And for right now, we'll close out the auth.ts. In the root directory, go to login form.tsx. And we'll need to add a few more things to this file. The first is we need to bring in cookies from next header. And that is because we are passing information and we have to make sure that our project is going to allow us to do so. That's going to come from next/headers and import cookies. And then the other thing we'll need to do before we bring in the action, I'm sorry, let's go ahead and bring in the action first. So we'll go import, and this is user login. Now let's go ahead and use the cookies, gain access to it first. So we'll say const CSRF token is equal to await and cookies, be sure to call it, and we'll go with .get, and then we'll say auth.js.csrf and dash token. Here, and then we can remove the extra there, and then after the token, we'll say question mark dot value or empty string. Okay, and then we need to use the action that we brought in. So we'll say action, and this is going to be the user login. And within the form, we'll need to pass in this verification, and we're getting yelled at because we need to add async. So within the form, we'll go input. We'll set the type to hidden. The name is going to equal CSRF token. Place it in the name field. And then the value, default value, is going to be the CSRF token. Okay, so if all goes well with this, we should be able to log in with one of the users that we just created. And I'm going to add the dashboard page just so we can see that it did redirect us to dashboard. Page.tsx. Save. And I think I'll go ahead and grab that user as well. And if I recall, are we sending that information? Session. Okay. So then we'll just go to the dashboard page, And I want to use that session just to make sure that it is capturing that user. So we'll say const session is equal to await get session. And be sure that it's coming from the lib directory. And then we'll say const user is equal to session, just in case we don't get one, session.user. Then we'll go const user email is equal to user question mark dot email. And we'll say if there's no session, then we want to redirect the user to log in. And just to make sure that this works properly, I just want to show the user's information on the dashboard page. Let's pass the user email, hit save. All right, so now if this works properly, we should be able to log in with one of the logged in users. Will be redirected to the dashboard page where we should see logged in as and the user email. So we'll go back to log in. And I think one of them is Chase. And we see that the type isn't updated because we see the password. So let's go back to website. It's off components, login form, and password. Let's add the type password. Hit save, close it out. Let's try it again. And as you can see, we have been redirected. And let me see if I can get the session into session ID. It's not letting me pass that object. We'll just go with user. That's right, because you need to get it. So we'll just say user.name. And it helps if add the question mark. So we're logged in as Jace, and that's the email. So perfect. That is working as designed. Now let's focus on the Google portion of this. So we'll go back to, let's go back to auth.ts. And the documentation would suggest to use the Prisma adapter, and you can. But for this project, I'm not using it because it's a little more involved in order to create that custom session and still work with credentials. In fact, the way I've normally gotten it to work is by separating those two out, but it's okay. We'll just write it from scratch. So underneath the callback, let's add async JWT, and we're going to pass in token and a user, and we'll say if user, and we'll say token.id is equal to user.id. And then underneath that if statement, we'll pass in return token, because that's what we want to return. And outside of this closing bracket there, we want to use sign in. So we'll say async sign in, and we'll be signing in with the user and an account. And then we'll say if the account question mark dot provider is equal to Google. Then we want a try catch block because we're going to need to validate some information. We'll say const email, name, image, and ID is going to be equal to the user. Then we want to await the connection to the database. Okay. And then we'll say const. First, we want to check and see if the user already exists. So we'll say already user is equal to await user dot find one for Mongoose. We'll be using the email. And if there isn't a already user, then we want to await user dot create, and we're going to create based off the email, name, image, and for this we'll store the auth provider. Underneath the catch portion, we'll say console.log OAuth error. And it will also throw a new error back to the browser. Then we'll need to add a return statement. And we're going to return true. Save. Help if I add in the provider at the top. So right here in Google, we need to set the client ID. This is going to be process.env.auth Google underscore ID. And then we'll say client secret is going to be equal to process.env.auth underscore Google underscore secrets. And make sure I have that in correctly. I'm going to go to the .env file, and I'm just going to copy the auth Google ID. Same for the secret. Save, okay. And then now, underneath the client secret, we'll add async, and we want to get access to profile. Pass in a profile, and we want to return the ID. That's profile. ID, name, profile.name, email, profile.email, and the image, profile.image. dot no, it's profile dot picture. All right, this looks good. And let's see, I'm still getting the error there with I might have the syntax off. Give me a second. Mm, mm, right. I have my syntax off a little bit. Sorry, this should be within. Sorry about that. Set my syntax off a little bit. I'm not going crazy. Okay. So now we should be able to log in with Google, and that user should be saved to the database, of course, and also redirected to the dashboard window. So let's test it out. But first, we'll need to add in the social login information. So we'll go back to VS Code, and we'll go to components. And I think we need to add the button first. So we'll go sign in dash button.tsx. And okay, so let's go ahead and bring in the button. So we'll import sign in. This is going to come from auth. And I want to add a icon. This is strictly optional. So within the terminal, we'll type npm I react icons. And I want to bring in the icons. We'll use FC for this one. So FC Google. So we'll create a const named sign in. Let's go ahead and export default sign in. We'll add a return statement within the const. So here we'll have the form. And inside of the form, we'll give it a class name of with full. That's just for styling, but the most pertinent piece is the action. And this is going to be an asynchronous action, of course. And then inside of it, I could have copied this directly from the docs. We'll just go use server. And what we are awaiting is the lookup with Google. Google. And then just for some styling for the button, I'm gonna pass in a p tag. It says log in with Google. Then next to the p tag, we'll have the Google icon, class height of 5 and a width of 5. And then inside of the button, we'll style it a little as well. We'll go class name flex, set the width to full, justify center, border rounded large, with a little padding of 2, some space on the X axis, I'm sure. And always make sure the items are centered. Save. So now that we have this button in place, let's go to, we can close out the oauth.ts and we can close out the sign in button. I think we need to go to social login, and instead of it reading social login, let's replace it with the sign in button that we just created. Okay, save. Now let's test it out. So we're on the login window and we see the button appears now. We'll click on Google. Redirecting us. So it didn't redirect us to dashboard. Let me see something. So this is where the redirect would have came in handy. Let's look at the MongoDB cluster. See, we have 3 documents or 3 users. So it worked. And this is where the redirect would have been beneficial, but it's okay because I don't want to use it because of the way it redirects with Nextjs. So what I do want to do is we'll go to the login window or login page, and we'll turn this to a asynchronous function. We'll go const session is equal to get session. Lib directory, and we'll say if there's a session, we want to redirect the user to dashboard. Hit save, go back to localhost. You see we're automatically redirected because we are logged in with the JA from Google. It is saved in the MongoDB database. So we have access, so we can now log in with the credentials or Google OAuth provider. So that's a quick video on how to log in or to how to set up user authentication in Nextjs 15 using the Google OAuth provider and also credentials. Next up, we'll focus on adding in the client. We'll focus on having the ability to create clients and see clients within the dashboard as a simple CRUD functionality to go along with the login capability. So hope you enjoyed this portion of the video. Stay tuned and we will focus on the second part, which will be adding in some CRUD functionality along with some other actions to our front end. Love you, man.